thing living like to count, cause mama, I'm sure.
Okay, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Cooper Island Town Hall. I'm Matt Thomas. I had the pleasure to meet George for the first time at Cooper Island when I was sailing past on my way through the Northwest Passage. Friends in Utgagvik told me that I needed to check in on him, and we've been friends ever since. But that aside, for right now, I feel pretty fortunate that I'm here able to represent my colony. I feel pretty confident that anybody who knows George will find that it's pretty interesting that he would let one of his study species actually get a word in edgewise. So after sharing our island with George for 50 years, I can say it's been pretty interesting. George has been more dedicated to his work than anybody that any of us in the colony have ever met. I do sometimes feel that he's a little bit of a voyeur. He certainly intrudes often into our personal lives, probing, weighing, banding, documenting our mating behavior, stuff that George is going to do. But we've all agreed that it's been a fair trade for letting him spy on us in exchange for his urban renewal projects that have given us plastic homes to live in and shelter us from the polar bears. Those cool plastic cases to breed and nest in have kept the bears out of our bedrooms for the most part and kept them from eating us while we were in our homes. And he's been very good about not commenting, to us anyway, about our mating and fidelity habits. And it's very nice when Catherine shows up and we have the opportunity to observe them for a change. We've sworn ourselves to silence that we're not going to let out any of our findings until they finally get published. So when our journal comes out, you can look forward to the articles on awkward human mating behavior in the Beaufort Sea. But enough of that. The colony looks forward to seeing George and Catherine again this summer, and I need to cut this short before George throws another red bag over my head and bans me again in public. So please enjoy tonight's discussion. George?
It's a strange trajectory to have talked to someone on the VHF radio saying, "Where are you going?" He says, "Oh, we're going into Canada," as they were heading east in the Beaufort Sea in 2020. This was the summer of 2020. It was pre-vaccine. It was a very strange time. He got turned around because it was pre-vaccine. So then he came back again and actually said, "Hey, can we pick you up and take you back into Utqiagvik?" And I wanted so much to leave. But I realized in terms of people say that I'm a dedicated person, I was dedicated to stay there until the breeding season was over that year. But I mean, 2020 was a tough year for everyone. And in that regard, it's just great to see a kind of a post-pandemic crowd here tonight. It's really. Thank you so much. And and anyone who happens to be online, thank you for joining us that way. It's very heartening. As someone who basically has a one-person nonprofit, getting the moral and financial and other support that people provide to me really plays a major role in getting through the summer. Because I think, does anyone really care that I'm doing this? That I'm basically away from Catherine and Carl for X number of months and things like that, and then I get back, and it isn't until you get the data from that year and punch it in now to a 48-year. There was a time when I didn't date people over 45. Now I have a 48-year database, so it's like. Okay, anyway, that could go a different way, but in terms of how we wanted to talk about this, I am so used to having not the same people, but very good, loyal followers come to this, and I'm thinking that when I get into the thing saying, okay, by the way, stop press, warming air melts snow and ice, and people are saying like yada yada. You know, I mean, they're thinking like, yes, we heard this in 2003, you know, and think actually that would be like almost 20 years ago, and stuff like that. So putting this talk together, I realized I didn't want to go over all of that. There's some very good videos online that talk about a lot of the changes, and there's a small thing at the start. But Katie and I were thinking about this, and it's important now, because of the state of the Arctic and the state of the study and everything else, to talk about stories. And that's one thing the Cooper Island colony has provided to me. It's like I have scientist friends who go out and gather data. I mean, and I go out and gather data. But many of those people come back and they don't have a story. And it's like, wait a minute, like tell me what happened, or basically explain to me, and this is a common thing, it is a not uncommon thing to ask a graduate student on their comprehensives in their orals. They say, tell me what you found out for your graduate research as if I am an 8th grader. So, like, I mean, can you explain it at that level? And luckily, I've always been at the level of an 8th grader. So, like, I mean, if I don't understand a study at that level, I can't even talk about it. And again, I've been able to study a colony where the changes are so clear and so abrupt that you don't have to do a great deal of data manipulation to see what's really going on. And, I mean, people don't, in terms of stories versus data, people don't read bedtime data to their kids. I mean, people read bedtime stories to their kids, and you know, and like having some narrative that basically says, I went there and found out this. And there are people who I know who are very good researchers. If you say, what did you find out? And they'll say, our multivariate model explained X% of the variation in this. And I'm thinking, yeah, tell me what you found. And also, it's like, okay, maybe your multivariate model explained that, but you're not explaining it. You know, I mean, and they use the term explain all the time. They go, by the way, changes in water temperature explain thus and such. And I said, okay, that was water temperature doing that. Now you have to take over and try to explain something. But again, that's okay. So stories of change, science and hope. This is a very good thing for me every year to basically get out of the general scientific presentation and also think about why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I have people who I know and respect, how I can tell them what I'm doing might be important. And there is someone, the only person in Seattle who's never heard the story before happens to be in the audience today. She actually mentioned to me she'd never heard of me until she saw the thing on Town Hall. So I am going to go over some basic things. But I've done a study at the edge of the Arctic pack ice since 1975. The red dot shows Cooper Island. Cooper Island is 25 kilometers or 25 miles. East of Point Barrow, Alaska, and of the village of Utqiagvik that used to be called Barrow, Alaska. And the species I've been studying is Manse black guillemot. And I had no intention when I first went up to the Arctic in 1970 to study the species. I was doing offshore surveys prior to the Prudhoe Bay oil field being developed at a time when they thought they might take supertankers into the Beaufort Sea, and no one knew what was out in the Beaufort Sea in the early 70s because no one had done any studies there. So I was on oceanographic cruises from 1970 to 72 doing bird observations while other people were doing work on plankton and fish and various things like that. So I visited all the barrier islands on the Beaufort Sea coast that summer to see what was breeding on them. Typically, there were terns, glaucous gulls, various things like that. Ground nesting species that would use drift lines for breeding habitat. And I was really surprised when I landed on Cooper to find this massive boxes that the Navy had left there. After the Korean War was ended and they had to blow up ordnance, so they went out there to blow some up and to also do some things offshore. And then when they left in 56, 57, they just left all these boxes. And it turns out that this cavity nesting species of seabird that had not been found breeding in the Beaufort Sea before, black guillemots, was breeding in these boxes. They were using these boxes for cavities. And I turned over some boxes in June and July of 1972, went back in August, and found birds breeding in these boxes I had flipped over. And anyone who's a birder or a bird watcher, and by the way, last night I had a very excellent time with the Washington Ornithological Society talking to birders, because basically I am basically a birder that figured out that I can stay out in the field if I keep doing this study. So one of the things, though, if you have a bird feeder, you connect with those birds a different way than if you're walking through the woods and you see them up in the trees. If you have a birdhouse, if you actually build a birdhouse and put it out, you then connect with the birds breeding there in a different way. I mean, there's a different psychological and spiritual or whatever connection. So here I was at the edge of the Arctic Ocean, basically creating nest sites for this high Arctic species, and it was like, hey, this is like really intriguing. So Cooper Island, which is known in Nuppiat as Igloo Rock, though no one in town calls it that anymore, we were going to change the name to Friends of Igloo Rock, but like I talked to a number of my very good friends who are Nuppiat, and they said, no, don't, because half the people in town won't even know what it is. So I was able to then go back to Cooper in the mid-'70s, because Richard Nixon had an offshore oil drilling plan, and again, there weren't enough studies done in the areas that they wanted to drill, and I knew that Cooper Island was a good place to study birds at the ice edge, so I got a contract or a grant to go out there and study birds at the ice edge, because I knew that the ice was always just directly adjacent to Cooper Island. Cooper Island is a low sand and gravel bar. This is our camp. A recent aerial photo. We have a bear fence around it now, but it looks like a very desolate place. If you're on the ground, it's much more interesting, and it's kind of somebody who was out there for a few days after, because I was stopping and looking at very small things on the ground that I found interesting, and he said, like, this is kind of like a Zen garden or something. I mean, you really have to get into it. It isn't like you're going through a big forest and it's like, major old growth that's really taking your breath away. There's like all sorts of little nuances that are like taking place. So I built nest sites from 1975 until the 80s, which is the red line on this graph. And the guillemots responded really well. And I was doing this because I wanted to study a seabird in detail. And seabirds breed in places where predators, including humans, can't get to them. So they breed on cliffs, they breed well back in rock and talus slopes, or they dig deep burrows to breed in. And I knew that Cooper Island offered a place where I could actually, if I could get this colony to be any size that was a decent sample size, be a place where I could have full access to all the nest contents, which would mean I could measure all the eggs, I could weigh all the chicks and various things like that. So I built 200 wooden sites from things that the Navy had left there. And man's-black guillemot, it turns out, I didn't know this when I started the study, is unique among almost all northern hemisphere birds in that it is an ice-obligate species in the Arctic. There are a number of Antarctic ice-obligate species because there's a lot more ice in the Antarctic. But only ivory gulls and black guillemots are a species that basically adapted to feeding on the food sources that are available next to the ice. And what's available next to the ice are the components of the cryopelagic is meaning ice pelagic ecosystem, and like all Arctic systems, it has a very low diversity of species. So there's only one main forage fish, which is the Arctic cod. So that everybody has to buy into Arctic cod, and guillemots are an Arctic cod specialist because they are in the Arctic basin next to the ice, and there's basically nothing else to eat. But lots of seals, lots of whales, beluga whales eat Arctic cod. And polar bears, to a great extent, are basically just repackaged Arctic cod. And this is something, I mean, everyone talks about the fact that like sea ice retreat is hurting polar bears, I mean, because there's a place they can't walk on. But they have been feeding on seals that have been feeding on Arctic cod. So there's a whole ecosystem change. So next September, when you see a thing about the sea ice minimum for the Arctic, realize that basically it isn't just X number of kilometers of ice that are being lost. It's thousands of Arctic cod that would have been there if the ice had more extent. So there was a rapid growth of the colony in response to my building these nest sites. And then starting in 1990, when there was a switch in the Arctic Oscillation, which is a major atmospheric component of what's going on in the Arctic, it started changing ocean circulation. It started letting warmer air come further north. So things started going downhill for a cryopelagic species because things were warming up and ice was melting. So the winter Arctic Oscillation had a number of effects in terms of ice circulation and things like that, and it's still having an effect today because things are not at all like they were in the past. The red box shows where my study's been done, and you can see how prior to my study starting in '75, things were pretty cold in the Arctic. I mean, that is in terms of basically. The red lines are for a positive Arctic Oscillation, which means things are warming up. And if you can see, and this is not, I mean, if you've been following weather at all, and the fact that our weather is getting wonky because of the polar vortex, this is part of the polar vortex thing. And it's just that the guillemots were leading the pack in terms of reacting to the polar vortex. I mean, you can see how during a period of a negative Arctic Oscillation, there is cold air over Cooper, and then warmer air comes up once you have that. So that was a major change that took place to melt ice. And then this is a rather, I mean, I've always been taken with this stat. It turns out that ice is one of the best reflectors of solar radiation to send it back into the atmosphere. Seawater is one of the best absorbers of solar radiation. So that if you have an area, as I have had just off Cooper, that used to be covered with ice, and just putting back the solar radiation and not taking that heat in, and then suddenly you have open water that's absorbing it, it is a major change, certainly in the physical components of what's going on. And the physical components of this have been much easier to study because you can get them from satellites now. There have been very few people, for a range of reasons, doing studies in the Alaskan Arctic, and that's mainly because there's no commercial fishery up there. If you go south of the Bering Strait, people are studying everything because there's a crab fishery and there's a pollock fishery and things like that, and certainly in the Gulf of Alaska. But just recently, because of the warming, pollock are starting to come up into the Chukchi. So the fisheries people are now interested in and again, fishery means I'm selling fish. It isn't, I mean, when people talk about fish stocks, it means a stock is a commodity. If they talked about fish populations, they might be an ichthyologist. If they're talking about fish stocks, they're a fishery person who is saying, hey, can we sell this in the future or now? So this is what's known as Arctic amplification, is that you have 1 year with a lot of open water, the heat gets absorbed, then the ice doesn't form as quickly. The next fall, it's thinner, it melts sooner that following spring, and then that cycle just keeps going. And it really, it's just ongoing, and it really is the thing that has been changing black guillemots on Cooper Island. So there has been a major change in the ice concentration north of Utqiagvik, north of Point Barrow. And as you can see, in the 21st century, there hasn't been much ice at all. And this is something, of course, that in '75, when I started this, I had no idea that I'd be able to see how a cryopelagic species would respond to that. But that has been the length of our study, of your study. And it's just striking. And it's also, I mean, it's kind of amazing that we have this data set that starts in '75 before things really got bad. And then we've been able to monitor individuals who live up to 25 years to see how they react to this. So it's like a very unique data set. And as that ice is pulled offshore and the water absorbs the heat, you then have this major increase in sea surface temperature, which changes everything in the water column and everything else. So this isn't just the cryopelagic system anymore. It's anything, any marine organism that is sensitive to sea surface temperature, and every marine organism has its comfort zone in terms of sea surface temperature, and that has changed greatly in the Alaskan Arctic. So Cooper Island, you know, I just did the study there for 10 years. Not much was going on, and then there was this major warming, and it is one of the it's in one of the areas that is warming most rapidly on the globe, and what's happening is, as a result, is there a back? Yes, they're back. No, there's not. But now the ice pulls way offshore, So that obviously anything breeding on Cooper Island that wants to exploit a prey resource like Arctic cod found under the ice is going to have a tough time. So our decrease in the population that I showed earlier tracks the Chukchi Sea ice extent. The Chukchi is directly west of Point Barrow, directly west of Cooper Island, and the Guillemots summer there and winter there and spend a great deal of time there. And the ice in the Chukchi has undergone this sort of change through time, and our population tracks this decrease in the Chukchi incredibly well. I mean, it's one of these things where people will model things to say, oh, by the way, like I was saying, what basically explains what was going on with this population. This is a situation where you could show this to almost any grade level student and say, okay, can you draw the line of the Cooper Island population decline, and can you draw the line for the Chukchi Sea ice decline? And what are the chances that those are just not connected? So one of the things that has been very unique about the Cooper study is that we've been able to band every chick that has fledged since 1975, which is basically only because of the access we had. And most seabird colonies, most real seabird colonies where you can't get to certain nests, you could never do that. But we did it, and we didn't even think we were doing it for this reason. We were doing it because we wanted to see when birds come back how old they were, and then we would have a known individual we could follow through their lifetime. It was basically the sort of thing you do if you're an ornithologist versus someone who's a climate person. So that we banded every chick with a color band and also with like a metal band, so we knew exactly who they were. And what we've been able to see in terms of the population, the breeding population per year, is who is local and who's an immigrant. And what we saw is that, oh my gosh, basically immigrants are certainly formed that rapid growth, which wasn't a surprise, but also basically sustained the population even during a period of decline. So immigration from elsewhere was a major factor in keeping the colony at the level that we were seeing it. And my colleagues in France and I have a paper coming out, hopefully very soon, that has a graph like this showing the contribution of the various demographic parameters. All you need to know is that the pink is immigration, and when immigration was down, the population was down. In those periods when immigration was high, the population increased. So it turns out that what I was seeing on Cooper in terms of the population track was like due to productivity at some other colony being able to produce enough immigrants to like send over to Cooper. And there aren't many black guillemot colonies in the Western Arctic, and certainly in Arctic Alaska, they're all very small. Cooper was the biggest one when it was like over 200 pairs. But there are two very large ones in the Siberian Arctic, Herald Island and Wrangel Island, that are real cliff colonies, like thousands of feet tall with lots of talus and scree and things like that. And they, when they were censused, were like found to have tens of thousands of guillemots in like the 1980s. They haven't been censused well since then, but it's clear that that's what was basically working on the Cooper Island colony in terms of what we were seeing, because immigration was the thing that was changing the colony growth. So one of the very fortunate things that happened is somebody on Herschel Island, where some guillemots are breeding in an old mission building, happened to be tracking numbers on a somewhat regular basis and recently rather regular. And it has the same arc in terms of an increase up until the 1990s and then a decrease that we have on Cooper. So we are rather confident that what we're seeing isn't just something that one guy saw on a sandbar with one population, that it's happening on like a region-wide basis. And again, it's mainly important because no one really cares about black guillemots. And actually, I said that on National Public Radio once. Neil Conan, I was on Talk of America, and we came back, and he said, "So is it all about polar bears and guillemots?" And I said, "No, Neil, like no one cares about black guillemots except 6 people, and the 6 people who study them, 3 of them don't like me very much, and I doubt the other 3 people's data." So it's like, yeah. But I mean, we all know what professional relationships are like, right? Yeah. I mean, being civil at cocktail parties is something even scientists can learn how to do, you know, even though there's no big payoff for it. Though I had a conversation. So anyway, so all this has gone on, and basically how has this impacted, and what are the nuances about how this change in the ice and the sea surface temperature, how has that impacted their access to Arctic cod? Well, we can put data loggers on the legs, on the tarsus, and we'll put one on Matt after tonight if we can. And actually, he is going to take a data logger when he does the Northwest Passage. He's going to be taking one up on his sailboat just to get his location by day, which will be so great. But we were like able to put data loggers on birds that we then saw coming back with fish, and to be able to generate this graph that shows that once you get above 2 degrees Celsius, Arctic cod certainly start dropping out, and at like 3.5, it's really gone over to sculpin. It's gone to this alternate prey that the birds don't like much, that the chicks don't like much, so that we were actually able to find out when that temperature change occurs. And that change probably doesn't just indicate the cod's response to the temperature. It may be a whole ecosystem response. It may be that their prey becomes less abundant, and then they move out of the foraging range. And the alternate prey, four-horned sculpin, is something that the chicks don't like. The parents don't like it very much, but it's the only thing around because it's an Arctic system, and the species diversity is so low. And chicks don't like them to the point you can see in the lower right that they will basically reject sculpin. I mean, even though they are having a tough time keeping going with things. And recently, though, I realized one of the things that is going on is that if they swallow something that has a head, like on the upper right, it gets to their stomach and it takes a long time to break down. I mean, it takes a lot of, creating acid or whatever it's going to be to break that down. Whereas, like, Arctic cod slip through like sardines. So like, it isn't just a caloric thing, because calorically, four-horned sculpin aren't that bad, but it's just that a chick couldn't eat 4 of them an hour the way it could Arctic cod. So we then, once we saw that the Arctic cod and the sculpin were changing, that there was a shift occurring in 2000, in like the early 2000s, we started doing daily observations of the number of, or the type of fish being brought back by day, and got like a percentage by day. In 2006, which was a very retro year, it was almost like the 1970s in terms of ice cover, it was all Arctic cod. In 2007, there was a seasonal decrease from Arctic cod to sculpin. And then in 2011, when the ice really pulled offshore, they just went to sculpin. So that was very interesting. And what was even more interesting to me is that we then started, since we had these data loggers on the parent birds, and we could get a number of metrics like the depth of the dive, the number of dives per hour, but the most telling metric was the hours underwater. How much time does a parent bird trying to feed 2 chicks have to spend underwater to feed those 2 chicks? I mean, it's a very straightforward thing. And you can see that as the temperature increased, there was like almost a doubling of the amount of time. So the parents, and we can measure chick survival, we can measure chick growth rates and things like that. We have no real way of measuring the cost of the Arctic change to the adult, but now we do, because we have these data loggers, and we know that if Arctic cod aren't around and if temperatures are that warm, that the parents are working that hard, which may well have, and we're analyzing this, our very large data set now, to see if there may be costs of reproduction, if like parent birds that are having to raise their young in the new Arctic are not doing as well in terms of their survival as the birds from the 70s and 80s that were in the old Arctic. So given the fact that we've been able to see how reduced ice and increasing SS and increasing sea surface temperature is reducing Arctic cod, we are now going through a thing where we're going to every colony, because there is good satellite data for each of them, and seeing that, yes, indeed, in every colony in the Western Arctic, ice is pulling offshore during the breeding season. The sea surface temperature is getting too warm for Arctic cod. So none of these Arctic cod specialists that are breeding, including the ones at this 10,000 and greater colony over in Russia, are able to get Arctic cod. So this ice retreat means essentially that the Western Arctic rather soon won't be able to have any prey available for at least for the numbers of birds that we've seen in the past. So that was the big thing. That was all the melt in the Chukchi and the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic basin. And we never really thought much about the non-breeding season, well, mainly because we can't monitor the non-breeding season. Birds leave, 90% of them in the past typically came back. We knew that they kind of went out into the Bering Sea, and we didn't really know much about them. But we have, and just because people had made observations, including some observations I made in the early 70s, we knew that they were at the ice edge in the Bering Sea in winter. But what was important about that is that we saw no long-term change in survival. Change in overwinter survival should be monitoring the conditions in the non-breeding season, and we weren't seeing any. So I thought, okay, so they are not able to reproduce the way they did in the past, but if you have a close to a 90% survival, you can have a few bad years and still have the colonies stay pretty big. So we have these light-sensitive geolocators, which is like the one I'm going to be putting on Matt's boat, that we put on birds like this, that tell you, because it monitors sunrise and sunset, the latitude and the longitude of the bird basically almost every day. It also gets some activity things like that. So we are now able to see where the birds are going in the winter. And we started this in 2011. Again, we've been lucky enough to start things before the big change, and we started doing our winter monitoring in 2011 before things started going downhill for the Bering Sea ice extent. And in 2017, 2018, things really went downhill. I mean, in terms of what had been recorded, it was the lowest ice record on record. And someone at like a major scientific meeting gave a talk on this, and I'd never heard, maybe I should say, I've never heard a physical scientist get so emotional about what they had seen. They were like, wait a minute, this isn't something that's meant to happen, because it was so totally unprecedented. And you can see what it looked like in terms of 2012 had rather average ice extent in the Bering Sea. 2018 had, is it 2018 or 2016? But I mean, the ice was then back in the Chukchi Sea when the birds should have been in the Bering, and because we had these data loggers on them, we could see that the birds were wintering much further north than they had. And then once we processed the information from the data loggers, we could see there was this major shift that occurred. And this was the first indication that, okay, now winter ice is the thing. So what happened after that, though, is that winter survival really went downhill. I mean, it had always been 90%. And again, this is the thing where, I mean, some of these birds, I was talking to these ornithologists last night. It's like, I mean, I saw some of these birds every year for 20 years. I mean, they were like the constant in my life. They were the only warm-blooded vertebrate that I saw annually over a period of time because I didn't go home for Christmas every year and things like that. So then when they started dying, I mean, basically it was like having people from your cohort just start dropping out at a much faster rate than you would expect. And so being on the island and seeing that firsthand meant a lot, but then plotting it and then working with these demographers to realize once you start losing your breeding stock, if you will, things really go downhill. You can always have mortality of juveniles or young and things like that, but I mean, if you can maintain long-lived breeders, things are going to be okay. And then this only happened, this certainly happened since last year when I was here. I found out that the Bering ground fish surveys that are done every year, and they do a very complete survey there because there's so much money coming out of the Bering Sea. And Arctic cod happen to go down there, as do guillemots in the winter. And recently, Arctic cod haven't been going into the Bering Sea. So, and it's like, I mean, but what's getting all the press is the fact that the king crab fishery is basically collapsing because of this, because of the fact that there is no cold pool. If like black guillemots had a newspaper, the headline would be, Arctic cod no longer in the Bering Sea in winter. So also there's been a thing with birds coming back to the island since 2017, 2018, and not even having the energy to breed or incubate the eggs that they do breed. So that was never recorded before. Now almost a third of the birds that come back lay eggs and don't incubate them. Yeah. So what this means is that basically the colony has had this major downward trajectory. And there are a number of tipping points that were identified by oceanographers as this is when things really started to change for the ice. And all of them are very much in line with where we saw major declines taking place. And this is the scary part now, because if things are going bad in the Bering Sea, and if 20 to 30 to 40% of the adults are dying every year, the colony is going to be a very different place. Because for a long time, as long as 90% of the adults were coming back, even though there was breeding failures because of things like that. One of the things that is striking to me is almost everything I've told you so far wasn't known about my study when I got on the cover of the New York Times Magazine in 2002. And watching the world melt away. All that was known then, and it seems so, somewhat benign now, is that because of spring warming, snow was melting earlier, and the birds were laying their eggs earlier, which was like a real climate change thing. And also, I did have back then like a 25-year study, which seemed impressive at that point. But it was a sign that climate change was taking place. Now the timing that the time that they're laying eggs really means nothing at all compared to what's going on offshore. This has always interested me. It's the reason why the birds. Why that cover of the New York Times Magazine existed, because Darcy Frey went up to Utqiagvik, talked to all the people who were at the NOAA monitoring station about what was going on, because the Times wanted to have something about Arctic change. And they said, hey, have you talked to the guy who's been out on the Arctic? And then Darcy came out to the island and wrote the whole thing about Cooper Island. Because if you have birds or any biota responding to physical changes, people engage with it much more. And even NOAA, when they're reporting on climate change and talking about this 2015 very early melt that occurred, they show pictures of guillemots. And that's in part because you can't show pictures of snow melting, I think. It's like watching. So what has happened is that Cooper Island went from being a place that for 20 years or so, this was what the north side looked like. And this is what it looks like now. And this looks this way for at least the past decade or so. It's a very different world. It's a very different world for me. It's certainly a very different world for a species that wants to survive on something that is associated with pack ice. As that was going on, there were two invasives that came out, that came to the colony because of the change in pack ice. A subarctic species, the horned puffin, moved north because there was much more open water and also warmer water, and it started breeding on Cooper Island in 1986, and also going into guillemot nests and pushing out eggs and killing young. And as the ice was retreating, polar bears that were on the ice were realizing their habitat, didn't realize, but they were finding their habitat was being restricted, so they would come swimming into the island, so that since 2002, polar bears have been a regular part of being on, of the Cooper Island groups of mammals and things. And they had a major effect on the survival of nestlings. And it got to the point where we said, okay, we have to do something to try to protect them, because I wanted to basically study how these birds were reacting to changes in the ocean, not to how many chicks a polar bear could eat in a day. So we then got these nest cases, which most of you know about, and we had a nest sponsorship thing for a while, and I was going to tell people how the birds in their cases did, but that was right before the major decline, and I thought, I don't want to say, oh, by the way, everybody failed in your nest this year. I mean, it wasn't a positive thing. And the chicks love being in the nest. The parents feel very secure there, and it's a very nice thing to be able to go and basically open a suitcase and find these chicks there, rather than have this big wooden structure that you have to move and things like that. So, there are a few interesting stories from Cooper. One of them is that I was left out there. I was dropped off there 1 year back when the Naval Arctic Research Lab would give us all of our gear and food and things for the year. We got out there and found there weren't any matches, and this is when we just had Coleman things. So it was like, okay, and unfortunately, the person who was the expediter thought that we were major dopers, and when we called in and said, hey, we ran out of matches, he basically assumed, I mean, of course, he didn't know you don't have to run through that many matches. I mean, for those of you who might have smoked up or not. But anyway, so we said, yeah, and because I mean, we had all the food and everything else, but he just overlooked that. So he said, well, there's a plane. It was a twin otter flying down to Deadhorse with some gear. And they don't like to land the plane on Cooper because it's certainly an off-runway landing, and it's a gravelly, soft substrate. But they certainly have landed twin otters there. They said, we are heading to Deadhorse. We're just going to drop off your matches. And also you got some mail too. So okay, great. So we go out, and this plane is circling at maybe 200, 300 feet or so, and the person who's in the back of the plane doesn't know that this pilot plans to come down and go right off the deck, right in front of us, because this has happened before, and just kick the thing out the door. So we're watching this plane, and suddenly and it was like one of these kind of very cheap plastic, airline bags that you could buy in the airports in the past when things were not as expensive as they are now. And it had some survey tape on it, and it comes streaming down, and luckily it hit the island, though it was like icy enough. So we're watching this happen, and we go running over and unzip the bag, and there's this funny smell. And we open it up, and there's like 3 boxes of Strike Anywhere matches with our letters wrapped around them. So it was it was very romantic to have my then girlfriend, to have this letter from her that was singed around the edges, if you will. But then, unfortunately, we then had to call in and say, oh, by the way, Terry, we need some more matches. And then I was like, no, Terry, you couldn't use 3 boxes of Strike. You would totally be very inept at lighting a joint if you did that. And this is just to remind you that, there are always funny things happen. I wouldn't go back if there weren't good stories. And I wouldn't go back if at least half of them weren't funny stories to me. Because I'm not like a big data hound. I love being in the Arctic and things like that. Something similar that happened where we had been dropped off there by a helicopter coming in from Prudhoe Bay, and they were then meant to go into Barrow and get our gear and bring it out, and they didn't have time to do that, and the weather was bad. So we were out there with just a minimal amount of food that we brought, and there was no coffee. So, there's 3, the critical things on the island: water, coffee, and I don't even know what the third one is. But we called in to the person in town, and this was actually this was when NARL closed in '81. They found a private pilot to say, okay, yeah, he can fly out with a box and we had some other things other than coffee. So again, we get this box. We open it up, and there in the corner is a totally shattered jar of U-Bahn coffee with glass shards and crystals. So we go, okay. So it's like, okay, we thought about it. We said, wait a minute, glass sinks, right? So that basically, if we make a full cup of coffee and only drink the top half, it's so that was our strategy, and none of the Arctic survival books that you read says what to do when the pilot drops the thing from that. So, which is why now we take a lot of food out with us and get by that way. And actually, there's this, this is just a kind of a side light, but when we're calling into Barrow, there was a woman, Tamara Enns, was talking to someone called Dave Ramey, and they were having this highly flirtatious exchange on VHF. And even to the point where at the end of the summer, when I was on the airplane coming south, someone said, oh, were you on that island with the couple, with the people? Because people were turning into their VHF. It was like, it was like this local soap opera. And so so I would be, in the next tent, covering my ears so I wouldn't hear, And then, basically, Tamara would say, Dave, are you there? And I'd say, Dave, it's Tamara. And so I got on once in the middle of something. I said, hey, you know what? You should have radio names. Tamara Enns, starts with a T and an E, should be Tango Echo. And Dave Ramey should be Delta Romeo, and they loved it. I mean, and the thing is, now, I mean, it's been 25 years later. I saw Craig George recently, and he said, "Oh, have you seen Tango at all?" I mean, she is still known as Tango. She's still known as Tango Echo. One of the things that happened is that they said, "Okay, so we're going to start calling you Golf Delta," which sounds like a retirement village. And I said, "No." So, like, I mean, luckily, no one's ever dealt with me as Golf Delta, but yeah. And actually, this is a picture of Tango Echo herself, out on Cooper Island. There's just in terms of water being important on Cooper Island, this is what Cooper Island looks like. So there is no water. I mean, it's basically anything that rains falls straight through. There's no, now that the permafrost is all melted, there aren't even any small standing ponds. And for years, for like 25 years, we would take multi-year ice, because ice, after it's frozen a second or third year, basically pushes all the salt out, and it's very good fresh water. And I mean, there's been, certainly natives have done this for a long, long time, that if you're someplace where you don't have fresh water, you basically use multi-year ice. And we did that, and we thought that was just great until because the pack ice changed, because the changes going on, multi-year ice isn't present. And one year, I ran out of water. And then I realized what I need to do is, as soon as I get there, Cooper Island, now the cabin is there, forms a pretty good snowdrift around it. So we have 2 large garbage bags, if you will, or garbage drums, that we just fill up full of snow and keep doing that so that we have snow melt. But it was interesting, when I was going out there in the 70s and 80s, I was living in the Bay Area with some humanistic psychologists, and I mentioned the fact that when I came off Cooper after being there for 13 weeks, 90% of my body consisted of previously frozen pack ice, which they thought was an amazing, I mean, they wanted to start a spa, saying, okay, because we know just how long it takes the human body to turn over all the water in it, and that people could go out there, and also the 24 hours of daylight would just be an added thing, because your serotonin levels would be high, and plus I could talk to them too, so no. But for like 25 years or more, every year when I flew south to Seattle, I consisted of 90% previously frozen pack ice, which women would still leave me. I don't know why. I'd say, what? Mainly because I was gone for 3 months, but that's another story. This is something I'd like to share with you if I could, because it's kind of, one of the things is that people in Fairbanks who do field work, at least in the past, in the 70s and 80s, there'd be like a potluck, and everyone would bring like 5 pictures from their field camp. And like, it was always sunny, and everyone was smiling, because, you don't take out the camera after that. And also, and people who were in the field who just wanted to kill each other were there smiling at each other, because you really don't, you can't let that out. And actually, this was written, if you've ever read the book 4 Against the Arctic, he was talking about these Russians who lived in a very small cabin over the winter, over a number of winters. And he said, I can't see how they can do that, because he had been camping with his best friend who, because they were stuck by the snow, that the chewing sound that this guy made when he was eating dinner was just so upsetting to him. So there's always a thing about covering up the fact that there's all the social interactions that you may have in the city are certainly going on there. I've been alone mainly on Cooper Island, and it's a different thing. I've been alone for like 4-week periods on a regular basis. I've had at least 2 6-week periods where I didn't see another human, okay? And in Darcy's piece, which was called a like lonely scientist, and what I learned after 2 weeks is that your head is saying, you are a social animal and you haven't seen a member of your species in 2 weeks. So we're going to try to move you around. We're going to get you really depressed. We're going to get you depressed so that you will like leave your current situation. And the first few times this happened, to be honest, it was very unsettling. Because it's like to get like very depressed and really kind of let, that kind of biochemical. There's nothing, I was just weighing chicks every day and doing that. And then when there was 1 week left for my typical 4-week period out there, I could see the time when I would be leaving. So like the last week wasn't bad. But this still happens to this day. It even happened last year, and it is tough. It's tough. And I mean, there isn't anyone who is going to say, oh, I mean, Arctic studs and things. Oh, by the way, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, it's very disconcerting. So what I have found out though is that if you read, I used to read a lot of nonfiction. If you read fiction, then you're in a social group. I mean, the people in the book are your social group. So like now, I just devour. I mean, I have to have. I once read a book twice. Seriously, I read a book twice because I finished it. There was nothing else to read. So I said, okay, I'm going to keep doing this because it's going to stop me from getting depressed because I'm basically in a situation where I'm not seeing anyone. So a midsummer depression. I mean, if you want to think about me next summer, and if I'm there alone, that's why Catherine comes out with me at the first part of the summer and stuff like that. So that's great. But yeah, probably the first week in August, if I'm there alone, I'm going to be saying, yeah, I'm doing this work, and I've done it for 48 years now, but whatever. But there's always something on the island. We have. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. Is there a tech person who could help me run this video or not? Okay, yeah. So anyway, we put these cameras out so that we can see things just like that, okay? That's how we keep track of fish and what they're feeding. So like we have a lot of these cameras out. And you have to be careful what you do on the island and where you do it because these cameras are it's like closed circuit TV. Right. Yeah. And then you're part of the record. So, but okay. So and actually and the guillemots who are monitoring me can then publish on that. One of the things though that is a saving grace is that for every fish that goes in, it comes out when chicks poop. So, I mean, one could actually probably, rather than monitor the amount of feeds that are going on, you could monitor the amount of poops. So Penelope Chilton, when she was out there, she'd be sitting there. And the thing is, I mean, I know it's like bad TV, but what's on TV now isn't much better than chicks. Chicks, you couldn't have a show called Chicks Pooping. The audience it would attract would be someone you don't know. But anyway, so like we have, basically we have more images of chicks pooping in case anyone wants them. And the thing is, once they get bigger, you get these big trajectories that can get frozen in the. I mean, this happens to be a video, but some of them are just single shot things. So there is like this large arc that is going out. So that in terms of this is the sort of thing that if I get very depressed in August, that I can like watch guillemots pooping. I'm sorry. There you go. One last time for the crowd. Yes. And then this is like one of my favorite. This is what a guillemot. This is what I think a guillemot thinks of me trying to monitor everything about them. This guy. And what's great about this is that one goes out in the field, picks up just a memory card, goes back, puts it in the computer, and sometimes you realize, oh my gosh, a bear was that close to the cabin. But I mean, as in that video that was running. But you don't know what you're going to see, and it really is there is no internet out there, so you can't look at like other inane things. So you can watch guillemots doing inane things. So this brings us to 2002, which was a tough year for the researchers and the birds on Cooper Island, okay? There were some dark skies over Cooper, even though the sun's up 24/7 until the 2nd of August. But the summer started with something that just made me feel so great. I walk into AC, Alaska Commercial Squawk Puck, and this person says, George Devokie. it's Kirby Sage. Kirby was a teenager in a small boat that lost power and was disoriented in 1984. Came up on Cooper with his friend and walked up very tentatively, because he didn't know who we were or anything else, and said, like, do you have a radio so we could call town and tell them that we need da-da-da? We said, sure. So like I got on the radio, and it turned out that Benny Nagyak, one of my better friends in town, was his uncle. And so like search and rescue was going to send their boat out and stuff. So then I look out, and these two kids have walked back to where their boat is, and they're like right in back of a very large Guillemot box back then, building a small fire. And I go over and I go, what are you doing? He said, oh, like, we want something to eat. We're going to cook something. I said, well, wait, come on, let's go. So like, we like had them in and made a whole bunch, and they were just incredibly, and he remembers this exactly. That's Kirby. And he was the teenager. And it just, and then I told him, I said, you know what, that fire that you made, that place where the wood was half burned, and then I asked you to come in and to stay there, it's still there. I mean, that's why stuff that was left by the Navy is still there. That's why stuff that was left by pre-contact people, like stone implements, are still there. I mean, Cooper is just great that way at retaining things. So it's very heartening. And this is also to mention that the study would not have been possible without the proximity and the support of the village of Barrow. It was just, and also now the major friendships that I have there. I've mentioned it mainly to anyone who's here for a passing knows, but in 2020, when no one was going north and NSF wouldn't let any researchers go north, I get an email from the North Slope Borough saying, when are you coming north? I mean, they so expected me to be there. And I mean, that was like, it wasn't, I mean, this was all pre-vaccine. I had to get a check as soon as I got off the thing. I got on the helicopter and but it was, yeah. It was, it's been, so people know about the cabin. The cabin is, ever since 2003, has been an important part of being out there. But last year, and after the event last year, none of us knew when we were standing here, or for those of us who were here last year in March, what had happened to the Cooper Island cabin. Ignatius Rigger, who happens to work for APL at UW, and my good friend Brian Burke, who's a helicopter pilot for search and rescue, flew by, and they took this picture. And I said, "Well, gosh, there's this, it looks like a bear broke in, and there's a piece of our survival suit there, and things like that, and other trash that the bear hauled out, and it looks like it just kind of ripped the door off." And then I looked at it, and I realized that this large piece of wood that's on this facing side is not the front door, it's the back wall. So like a polar bear had gone in and ripped out the back wall. We didn't know it was 1/4-inch plywood, we know that now. And it was, to be honest, and actually the Guillemot who was out here earlier was actually with me on this trip. We went out over there, and people loved, certainly photographers who come out love to get this picture of the whole Cooper Island cabin, and that's what the backside of the cabin typically looks like. This is taken from where the door is. This is what it looks like after the bear was there. This is Geoff Carroll, who went out before we were even there, and was using the back, mainly because the front door was still boarded in. I had done that well enough. And it turned out, I went out there with Matt and Geoff and Craig George to basically assess what I needed to buy to get through the summer to see what was wrecked. And it turns out everything was wrecked. And like kind of what was most important to me is that one of the windows was broken. And once I take the board off that window, having that window there is important for both thermal regulation and wind and things like that. So I was very concerned. And and as you can see, what was something is that the bear ripped out all the blue board and ate the blue board. It just trashed everything. So like I came back from this trip in April and just got online and realized, okay, and it's one of those things where it's very good to say, okay, what do I need to cook? So you go through what you need to cook. What do I need to sleep? Because basically I had to buy everything. There was like nothing that was salvageable, even the solar panels. So a group of us, and luckily two of them, at least if not more, who are much better at carpentry than I am, went out in April and put this very sturdy wall on the back. So this was a big thing. But what had happened is that we then got all the trash out. Catherine and I went up, opened the door of the place, and realized, okay, we just started shoveling. We just had to get everything out. And there was this huge mass of trash. Catherine, while I was doing my Guillemot work, if you will, Catherine bagged 37 bags of trash, including like thing. Okay, yes, that's fine. So anyway, it was the best, I was so glad that like I had married her the previous fall. Because like I would never expect a girlfriend to do that. Or if a girlfriend did that, I would get married immediately to them. But luckily I was married, so I didn't have to go to that. And so I was going to buy a big piece of glass or plexiglass to like replace the window because it was a major concern. I had bought some kind of visqueen, if you know what that is. It's a rather thick, transparent thing. And I thought, well, maybe we'll see how this might work. Catherine made this window, basically took out the broken glass, which wasn't easy to do, and used very good tape. So now we aren't going to have to replace that at all. I'm going to probably knock out all the other windows and have her just put that in. Because that way we won't have to worry about broken glass in the future. It's like, yeah. So this is all leading up to what happened this past summer, it's important to have a positive feel about it. And also know that, I'm not out there because people say, gosh, it must be tough to be out there. And I think people think I'm walking around holding my head saying, oh, I can't believe this is going on and things like that. But this is what happened in 2022. 27 pairs laid eggs. This was a colony that used to have 227 pairs. Now it has 27 pairs. 6 pairs are the ones we're talking about that come back from the winter and don't have the energy or whatever to even lay eggs, even though they are paired up with each other and owned a nest site. So that the hatching success for the eggs that were laid was 57%, which is not good at all. It should be over 75 to be decent. Fledging success was 8%. And breeding success, which is the number of chicks fledged from the number of eggs, was 5%. And that typically should be at least 50%. So now it seems clear that colony, there are so few birds, roughly 3/4 of all the birds that fledge will die in the first 3 years. So it is very doubtful of the 6 or 7 birds that made it through, the chicks that made it through the year are going to be able to come back. And if they do, there isn't going to be much to do. What was also really important is that for the first year ever, no immigrants were seen. And this was and we know immigrants because they are unbanded. And this was the first year in 4+ decades where there wasn't one bird from some other colony that came into Cooper to breed. So that the extinction of the Cooper Island colony is going to occur in the next decade. This, for me, has a number of major implications. One of them being that when I used to have 225 nests to check every day, I was busy as can be. And it was fine. I was exhausted at the end of the day. It was now, if I have like 6 nests or 12 nests to monitor, I wake up and go, okay, should I do 6 of them before lunch? And then maybe after lunch, I'll do the other 6. And there's like a lot of spare time. And I don't have internet. I can do some data processing, but not much. So, reading lots of books is something. But as Catherine Wells knows, it is an unheated cabin. It isn't the greatest place to sit. One of the reasons I was always comfortable out there because I was walking around from nest site to nest site and bending down, sitting in a 45-degree cabin all day, reading. Isn't a pleasant thing. So I'm going to have to make a decision about, because in the past I would stay out there for 13 weeks, and it just isn't really, it isn't worth my while for a number of reasons. One, there isn't, like the data that I'm getting, we know where this is going, and I could document a number of things that are going on, but it's not going to change what the whole 40-some years has shown. And also, I don't want to be away from Catherine that long. So, yeah. So there is, though, because we're a base 10 species, there is this positive thing about the next few years, okay? This is a rare rainbow over Cooper Island. Though, of course, when you're in a situation where you're inside the electric bear fence and you're looking at the rainbow, it's kind of a mixed message. It's like, I mean, is there a bear at the end of the rainbow? Or is that, and this is important for all of you, that we are gearing up now. Like next year will be our 50th year, my 50th year, on the island. But in 2025, it is our 50th anniversary. And it's going to be a big deal. I mean, there are at least two major media people. Joe McNally says he's going to come back with his Nikon crew. Kevin McMahon, who did the Polar Sea series that you might have seen that was on Canadian TV, that had a small Cooper Island thing. He is right now trying to find, he is shopping around to see who can send him out. He wants to come out this summer to document some things too. But it is going to be a very unique thing in a number of ways, is that having a 50-year study in the Arctic is pretty bizarre. Having a 50-year study that actually extended from things being very good for the study species at the start to being to the point where the colony is going extinct. So we will be going, I will be going, and Catherine will be going out until 2025. And what's important is that one of the reasons I'm able to do that is because someone like Katie Morrison has just been so supportive over the years. She was up there for, this was when we were both up in Utqiagvik for a group putting various lesson plans together. And Katie, I really think I can provide you a number of videos, and if I'm sure that K through 6 kids would love a lesson plan based on the frequency of chick pooping. I mean, they would be glued, if you will, to their screens. So, and they could then graph it. So, I mean, there aren't that many data sets you can gather and laugh the whole time that you are you are seeing them. I'd also like to mention that Melissa Mager, who's here tonight and was up in Barrow for our 40th when we were up there, has been a major supporter and just been a great person to know in lots of ways. And as I've told Catherine and her, she is my second favorite lawyer from Oklahoma. And in this picture, there's Brad Sarvetson, Catherine, Robert Sudam, and... Brad's watching online for Mexico, by the way. Oh, good. Okay, well, no, that's Brad. Yeah. And I had just gotten out of the field, which is why I look like a 70s rocker or something like that. So, and that, I mean, and we're going to be doing a big thing in Barrow. We're going to have an outreach event this year also. But we had, for the 40th, we had Barrow support crew, Cooper Island, friends of Cooper Island. We're going to be getting lots of swag and various things like that. So come back, if you miss the next year or two, come back in 2025, and we'll have lots of Cooper Island things for that. So, and also someone who's helped out over the past 20 few years greatly. One of the things you should note here in terms of chicks pooping, this is what your pants look like. And actually, what happened this year is Craig George came out in his boat, and I'm walking up the boat, and he goes, and this was because there were 6 nests. He says, "Your pants are clean. Your pants." I mean, it's so great that I was known to have pants that look like this, and Catherine wasn't actually weighing as many chicks, and this isn't the most attractive picture of her because of her hat and things, but I think of her drinking champagne on the coast of France with me because we have to go over there now to work with our demographers. So yes, so thank you, Catherine, for everything. So yes, I'd like to thank the people of Utqiagvik, the Inupiat, who let me work on their island, and who have just become such good friends and just so supportive. It just means everything to me to get there, and they don't see me as an outsider. One of the nicest things that, one of the very nice things that happened to me when I was up there, there was a meeting, and 4 feds, if you will, people from the federal government in Washington, D.C., came in wearing suits to a meeting in Utqiagvik. And I was there, and I was sitting at the side, and they were talking to the people in wildlife management. And I thought of a number of points that could have been raised. And I went up to one of the people, one of my native friends who was there afterwards, and I said, "God, I should have said that, but I mean, I realize I'm kind of an outsider." And he looked at me and said, "No, George, you're one of us. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was great. So anyway, thanks very much for being here. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your interest. And yeah, we are going to have, for the 50th, we're going to have lots of funny stories. We're going to have people who've been out to Cooper tell funny stories about me, if you will. So yeah. And now, Katie, do you want to? Okay. Here. Okay.
Thank you, George.
Okay, go ahead.
We have time for some questions. If you have a question, I'll bring the mic around. Oh, question.
So since you're near Point Barrow, Alaska, and if Cooper's Island is actually a part of the Alaskan territory, I was wondering if they have an Endangered Species Act listing for your birds?
Oh, well, one of the problems with Manse black guillemot is that it isn't its own species, so that it's in the same species as the black guillemots that are off the coast of Maine and all around Great Britain. It is so different genetically. It's certainly its own subspecies. That if someone and the people who I've talked to about some of the work that has been done on the blood samples we've given them, if they were to basically try to make it a species, they could possibly do so, but it isn't clear what the Endangered Species Act, how the species would benefit at all from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, the Endangered Species Act is turning 50 this year.
Oh, well, yeah. No, and the thing is, all of these things aren't. It isn't just by chance, because like the early 70s. When I started doing work up in Arctic Alaska, I was very much, and when Earth Day was taking place and things like that, one of the things that people have asked me, I guess maybe in like a college lecture or something, is like, have you ever thought about doing supplemental feeding of the chicks? And it isn't easy to see a chick losing weight every day and realizing, oh, it's starving to death. And of course, what we're trying to monitor is, can these parents feed the chick? Is there enough food there for that? If it was just a thing of saying, we want guillemots to breed on Cooper Island, we might do that, but that would, certainly at this stage, it would be too few chicks to make any difference. And certainly if they're dying in the Bering Sea, the way that they seem to be, in that there isn't anything one could do. We probably could have, in 2008, 2009, gotten money to put out nest cases. But luckily, Friends of Cooper Island provided those nest cases. So that was about the only thing one could do.
Oh, sorry. Get my steps in.
You didn't go over how you protect the nests from the puffins and the polar bears?
Well, we one of the things about having a colony where I had access to all nest sites, to all nest contents, polar bears then had access to all nest contents. So that was, when it started happening in 2002, 2003, I realized, oh yeah, this is a real downside for this. And then it took us 7 years to realize we could put out these nanook cases, which is basically like a pelican case. So that stops, it doesn't stop the curiosity of a bear, and they might flip it over, and actually, in some cases, they can, if there's a bunch of gravel in the site, they can actually damage or hurt the chick, but we don't typically have any gravel, we just have sand and things like that. And then if they can't get a chick out of the first nest that they encounter, the first black box, they don't go around to every black box and check that out. So like having that, in terms of the puffins, it's a very interesting thing with the puffins. The puffins were there from 86 when they first started, they were from 75 prospecting for nest sites, but from 86 when they started breeding up until 2009 when the BBC Natural History Unit came out as part of the Frozen Planet, and they called me up and they said, hey, they called me up in Seattle and they said, hey, we are doing a component about winners and losers in the Arctic. And I said, okay, so are you thinking of me as one of the losers in the Arctic? But but it was basically that the puffins were coming up as a subarctic species and displacing the guillemots. So they came out. It was a big deal actually, because they had a lot of gear and stuff like that, and we set up the cameras and the blinds right close to the nests where the puffins had been for the previous almost like 20 years or so, and the puffins didn't show up that year. And I'm good friends with the two people. Or, I mean, I was stuck in a cabin with them for 2 weeks, and they drank all my rum. So David White and Liz Wright got to be good friends. But no, and we do, if you happen to buy the Frozen Planet thing, we are on the supplemental DVD. They wanted to get something, because certainly they got some footage. But what was interesting is that David, when he was out there and he realized what was going on with the colony, he said, this is a much bigger story than what's going on with puffins displacing guillemots. This is a whole, ecosystem shift thing that you're studying. And David came back the following year to get some more video, but now he's well employed doing other things. But it's been great to have, and Art Howard, who got this great video, the bird watcher who saw the future, having these people who come out there and just spend a little bit of time and talk to me and get enough footage to put the story together. It's just, I'm really taken with it. And also, I've gotten to be very good friends with those people too.
Oh, yeah, hi.
George, it's always so great to hear all your stories. So how many, what's the number? How many birds have you banded over the 40-some years?
Are you thinking we're going to do another lottery next year? Because, we have had a thing saying if you can guess how many you get, I don't know what you get. It's been, in terms of the chicks, it's over 4,000 in terms of the nestlings. In terms of the adults, it's around 3,000. And it's really, there is enough to keep me busy for a long time. It isn't like, oh my God, once the field study is producing less and less, there's not much to do. There's like a wealth of things. I'm writing a paper on phylopatry right now about what happens to locals and immigrants when they come in like that. And also this collaboration with the French has been so good because they are very much on the top of seabird population studies and are just anxious as can be to look. One of the things that we're doing now is getting a postdoc lined up. It turns out, and you'll probably be seeing a graph about this next year, it turns out that egg size follows almost the same arc as the population. It was like increasing when the population was increasing, which may be because birds were just getting older and laying bigger eggs. But then it starts to decrease when the population goes down, which shouldn't be happening, and only if prey is less available to females that are forming eggs. So given the fact that we can control for individual, which all the other egg size studies at seabird colonies, people just go and just measure 200 eggs or something and do it. They don't know who those females are. We know who the females are, and we know the pedigree for many of them. So like we have, so it's like you can control for lineage to say, okay, is this bird from a big egg or a small egg family? So yeah. So like that's, it's very exciting, and also it's just going to show it's another thing that monitors Arctic cod being less available.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't say this is a question, but I would say thank you for bearing witness for all of us city dwellers who are, passively watching the world change. So thank you.
Yeah, it's, there is this thing where, it's like you don't know what to do, but you realize that, okay, there are people who become, zealots and climate change activists to the point where it's like, wait a minute, this is what I'm dedicating. People who do chain themselves to the White House fence. I might have done that in the 70s, But it's just, now I know how systems work and things like that, and I have to balance my own happiness and everything else along with what I think is possible. And again, I'm hoping, though this is something I didn't mention, I was very, when I started this study in the 70s, you thought, okay, if we can find out something about environmental change, there might be a federal government that's going to respond to it. During the time I've been on the island, there was a lease sale opened up in the Chukchi Sea by Barack Obama, which was right in the area where these birds spend the fall. And then now, just to the east of us, the Willow Project might be going on. And I'm out there and listening to the news about, new oil discoveries in the state of Alaska, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. It's like being in the engine room of the Titanic and seeing the water come up and then going above deck, and then everyone's having a party. Everyone's having a party. And you think, and it's like, wait a minute, what can you do? And it's like, at some point you realize, well, wait a minute, okay, give me a drink, and let's, So, yeah. What's that? Well, no, and sure, I know. And the thing is, even in 2002, when the New York Times came out, a New York Times article, and then the IBM ThinkPad ad, and then the David Letterman thing, and a whole bunch of stuff, the Alan All, the Scientific American Frontiers. It was like, okay, good. This is really getting out there, and now people are realizing that Arctic changes. And I was really happy that I was able to do that. And then even as recently as 2011, when Jack Thorne wrote the screenplay wrote the play at the Royal National Theatre about climate change, called Greenland, which had a thread that had two characters playing me, one as an adult, though I don't know how they got that one's cast, and then one as a youth. And I thought, this is so great. And of course, and they were doing that. They specifically did that play. They had it written because they wanted to have people be thinking more about climate change in 2011. And the fact that this study was included was, just a great, honor. But then you realize it's, you don't know what's going to happen next. So. But anyway, thank you so much. Be good to your friends, and, be good to your lovers and your husbands and your wives.
And I'll just thank everyone so much for coming. It's so great to see so many familiar faces who come each year, and then lots of new faces too. And the folks online, we really appreciate it. Some of you, come for the data or the birds, maybe the drinks, but we probably all stay for the stories. And we just really appreciate it. I'll just say on behalf of George, your being here just means so much to him and his work and his study. So thank you so much. Yes.
Tell us where to put the checks and encourage everybody.
Oh, great. Yes. If you would like to help support, I'm at a table just back here. We have some note cards and museum catalogs from the museum exhibit if you would like to. Yes, the books. Yes. Please come on by my table.